Welcome, everyone. We are truly thrilled that you're joining us today to do some exploring in this workshop series that we're calling Teaching Hidden Histories. My name is Beth Berenger, and I am the Director of Education Programs for Essex Heritage. And if you're not familiar with our organization, all of Essex County, Massachusetts is actually designated federally as a National Heritage Area. Because of all the wonderful cultural and natural and historic resources that we have up here in the northeast part of the state. And our nonprofit really seeks to try to connect people to all of those wonderful assets. And today particularly, it's history. And so thrilled to do this with you today. We really want to thank the National Park Foundation, which has generously given us funding for this program. We have a special relationship with the national parks in the area, and I think a couple of our park friends are with us today. So we're lucky that we get to apply for some of that funding. And so very, very happy to be able to bring this to you for free. Today we're going to be exploring this immigration history in Greater Lawrence. And we see it really as a window into some of the larger stories and topics that we want to explore with our students. Just a little bit about Zoom today. We're all very familiar with these routines, but we'd love for you to keep your camera on if you can. And obviously, if you're having, some sort of connection problems and it's easier for you to keep it off, that's, fine. But we'd love to see faces. We do want to let you know that the session is being recorded. So if that, maybe influences your decision, please just keep that in mind. Of course, we would like you to stay muted if possible because of the numbers of people, and that just helps the speakers to be heard. We'd love for you to use the chat feature. So please do that because we do want this to be interactive, and especially as we move into the panel. And if a question comes to mind, we'd love for you to, voice that. And want to introduce to Sherry Grishin, who is my colleague here at Essex Heritage. And maybe Sherry, just kind of say hello so people can see who you are.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So Sherry is going to be watching the chat for us and kind of helping us facilitate things. And again, please just use that chat function. We wanted to just give you a little bit of the background of how this project gets started. And at this point, I would like to introduce Brian Sheehy. He is the history coordinator for North Andover Public High School. And has won, what was it, Brian, like 5-7 teaching awards last year. I was losing count, but we have to tease Brian because he's really just an amazing teacher. And it's really because of him and his students that this project got started. And so want to just let Brian talk to you a little bit about kind of the impetus for this project.
It's a tough introduction to follow. Thank you. First off, I just want to thank Essex National Heritage for allowing this to happen. Thank all of you for coming today. A little background on where this came from. Obviously, with everything happening over the summer, students were confused. Students were mad, angry about what was happening, and they wanted to know more about it. And Mary Tracy's here today. Each of us got an email from a group of former students demanding that we change our curriculum. Okay, that's a tough thing to do. So we had some educational roundtable groups over the summer, talked about how we could start initiating a change and kind of hear from students. And obviously changing curriculum large scale is very difficult. So I kind of looked at what can I do? How can I make a change? And working with some of the students, I'm a firm believer in the importance of local history. So I said a lot of the things in topics that we're seeing nationally, they happened here. And when students can kind of see these things locally, they become more invested. And by empowering teachers, and then getting this material to teachers is important. So putting this together for teachers, I thought was important. And when I told the students about how many people registered, they were floored. And it's a credit to all of you people for kind of taking this initiative and wanting to learn more about the area and some of the hidden histories. And they thank you, and I thank you for being here today.
Great. You know, when we were putting this together, Brian found this quote in a book that he just picked up that he felt really, and I agree, really sort of gets to the heart of sort of the intention of this program. And I really wanted to read it to you, but I see here that it's, hold on, let me see if I can move this over. Let me see if I can read this. Okay, I'm going to read this. So this is from David Silverman's This Land is Their Land. Serious critical history tends to be hard on the living. It challenges us to see distortions embedded in the heroic national origin myths that we've been taught since childhood. People from our own society who are not supposed to matter and whose historical experiences show how the injustices of the past have shaped the injustices of the present, move from the shadows into the light. Because critical history challenges assumptions and authority, it often leaves us feeling uncomfortable. Yet it also has the capacity to help us become more humble and humane. So we really just loved that quote and thought that it really kind of set us up for the day today. You know, as we're thinking about what we can do, and as Brian was thinking about, well, what can we do? We're all here today together. And you know, we have folks from different backgrounds. Most of us are teachers, but we do have folks from historical societies, and we have our scholars with us today. And we even are going to hear from some student voices, and maybe you're part of school committee. You know, all of us coming together to try to work on this because it's hard. It's hard to do this. But if we can collaborate together, then, you know, we've done something today, and we can be happy about that. I also just wanted to include this quote because this article is something that I've gone back to time and again. Thinking about local history, and particularly for Essex Heritage, we're always trying to connect people to our communities and to our homes, and especially through teaching and learning. And I just love this idea of critical pedagogy of place, and using place as the texts that we can study with our students. And so really thinking about how, as Brian was saying, you know, local history can be much more meaningful and can give us a window into the larger histories that our students can learn about if they can experience it locally and understand it locally. And maybe that can mean that they also want to do something and become more involved and become more engaged. So anyway, wanted to just include that as well, because that's really what we want to inspire, is to help kids feel like they can better understand the truth about our history, and then maybe, you know, become engaged and do something with it. So today we have some of the questions that are going to guide our exploration. We want to start to answer together how this example of immigrants' history in Greater Lawrence, again, is illuminating some of these larger stories that have been hidden in our American history. And I hope you were able to take a look at Ruben Enrique's video before joining us. He is our friend from DESE, who is really trying to help us think about integrating that guiding principle too, so that we can be more inclusive and think about those voices that maybe we don't always include in our teaching because we weren't taught to include them. And we need to teach ourselves to teach in a new way to be more inclusive. And then how can we help students connect with this history, keeping their voices and ideas at the forefront of our teaching? And again, that's really trying to use that responsive lens and keeping in our minds, okay, who am I teaching? How can I draw them in? What are their experiences that are going to feel like they're going to connect with what I'm teaching? How do we create a safe environment for difficult conversations about complex issues surrounding race identity and what it means to be American? And especially in this local context, which might really feel like it's going to hit close to home. And that's that critical lens that Ruben kind of described. And we're going to get some help with that from Glenys Sanchez and some of our other presenters today. And then particularly for today, of course, we're looking at immigration. Brian did a lot of research into Irish immigration in the Lawrence area. And of course, we have Latinx immigration that we're going to be focusing on. Really love that presentation from Dr. Barber, and hope you again that you were all able to view that and start to like get into this content a little bit more. And then how can the voices from the immigrant community and local primary source analysis inform our understanding of how to approach this topic? So, you know, one method that we can use is to go to those sources. And we have an enormous amount of sources that Brian put together from a lot of our partners. We're so grateful to them. But trying to use those sources to get to this evidence, to get to these truths. Really wanted to point out the videos of the immigrant oral histories that Lawrence History Center has available. We are not going to be using those today just because for timing's sake, but wanted to point those out as really rich sources. And I think that Mark Cutler is with us today too, and he was instrumental with Lawrence History in making those available. Just wanted to put those out. So today, we're almost done with our intro here. Then we're going to get to our panel. And again, would love for you to participate with any questions that are popping into your mind with the chat, that would be great. Then we have a little session that's been recorded by Brian and his students, modeling using some of these sources. So we'll be watching that together, just as kind of like an example for us to think about. And then we'll be moving into breakout rooms where we're going to have you know, folks start to think about some of this content that we've been absorbing with our wonderful panelists and, you know, anything else that's been striking us. And we're also going to have groupings of primary sources that are going to be kind of grouped by theme. And just to warn you, some of the groupings maybe have more sources than you're going to be able to digest in the amount of time that we'll have together. But you know, just kind of doing your best to take a look at those and see how might I use some of these sources in curriculum, or, you know, what kind of challenges we see with those. And we'll do some debriefing of that. And then I know that some of you are interested in PDPs, and we are Essex Heritage's PDP provider. So at the end, if you're interested in that, we can go over that a little bit. We also have some stipends to offer that we will have an application process for. And so I'll go over that. And you know, this is just the first in a series of workshops that we're able to offer. So registration is now open for the next one, which is going to be on March 27, and it's going to be exploring African-American experience in Essex County. We already have a couple of presenters, and actually I think Cabria Baumgartner is with us today. She's one of them. She's done this amazing report on that topic in Essex County. So wanted to just mention that. Okay, again, really want to thank Brian and especially his students. So instrumental in putting this program together. Also, really wanted to mention give our thanks to our partners. And Brian, you want to say a little bit more about Lawrence History Center and others?
So I saw Amita's here. Thank you for all of the work that you do. You and Susan, the Lawrence History Center is great. The Memorial Library in Andover, Memorial Hall Library in like Andover, I kept sending them requests for different articles, and they would always send them over. The Lawrence Public Library, all those sources that that you guys are going to have access to, the vast majority of them came from the Lawrence History Center, and I can't thank them enough for allowing that.
And we're looking forward to working with more of our partners, and had some great conversations with North Andover Historical Society and Andover Center for History and Culture. And also for the next session, we're going to be kind of broadening the reach into other parts of Essex County as well. But now I'd really like to introduce, before I introduce Brad, I almost skipped Ruben Enriquez. So Ruben, who I think is with us, so helpful in kind of helping us make the jump between content and then putting some of this into practice as teachers. This is a really difficult thing to do. And we're so grateful to all of the work that Ruben is doing at DESE to help us with this idea of guiding principle number 2. And hope he'll jump into the conversation here as well. Brad Austin is going to be the moderator for our panel. Panelists are listed under Brad there: Lana Barber, Robert Ferrant, and Glennie Sanchez. Brad is a true friend of Essex Heritage and is really a mentor for us. He, along with some other folks, led the Using Essex History professional development program that Brian and I both took part in when we were teaching, well, when I was teaching many years ago. But really the idea for this PD, it has a lot of its roots in that Using Essex History. Maybe some of others of you who are on this with us today also took part in that. So Brad, professor of history and also in education at Salem State, I'm going to kind of turn this over to you and our panelists.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to do this. You know, if I can be on a Zoom on a Saturday morning, I'll take that opportunity every time. What I thought I could do is handle a couple housekeeping things real quickly and then get out of the way as much as I can. One thing is, you know, as Beth and Brian were alluding to, is I approach this these topics from wearing a variety of different hats. I am a historian of modern American history. So I'm very interested in this and learning from colleagues at other places. In some ways, I've always loved professional development sessions because it's like going back to grad school. You get to read the recent scholarship, you get to talk to the smartest folks, and that's the best. I'm also someone who teaches methods class, and so hearing from Glenise and Enrique, not Enrique. I'm looking at my notes. I'm sorry.
Ruben.
Ruben. I'm sorry. It's really helpful, especially the guiding principle too. It's something I emphasize to my method students, and so getting that validation is really important. And also, I'm co-teaching a class at Salem High School, and so just thinking about how this affects my own practice, it's just really beneficial for me. And so, no matter which of the hats I'm wearing at any moment, I love doing this kind of thing. The other thing is that I'm just energized by being in a virtual room or a real room with people who, I'm kidding aside, who did sign up for professional development, 60-something people almost on a Saturday morning. It's just great to see that commitment out there, and it's inspiring. The other thing I think we should just note as teachers and people who train teachers is the design of this workshop itself. And in many ways, this is a flipped classroom type approach where we did some pre-work, and now we're going to ask clarifying questions and get some more answers and kind of refine our understanding. And then we're going to learn to practice, and we'll have student voices and teacher conversations as the center of that, and looking at sources. I just think that's a really good model. And the idea, again, it's intentional that Brian and Beth have designed it, where we have content experts, classroom teachers, curriculum folks helping us think through this. I think it's just worth noting that that they've designed a really good program, despite their unfortunate choice maybe of moderator of this session. Let's get going. The panel we've been introduced to. We have, I think I had 13 or 14 questions to draw from teachers to ask. So what I'd like us to do, maybe to get started, is to begin with there's part of my approach to all this is that from earlier professional development and some of my own scholarship is that, to really teach topics that are hidden, that are difficult, as Glenise talked about, and we hope at some point these aren't hard conversations. But to teach some of these conversations, you need content knowledge, so we're confident enough to wade into these waters, and we also need the conviction that it's important. So what I thought we could do is maybe begin, and then the skills and the confidence to do it. I thought we could begin with, if those are kind of different elements of this, to begin with some of the content questions, and recognizing that we only have like 26 minutes. To start really broad and see where our panelists and where our questions take us. I thought we could begin maybe with a question about the kind of the fundamental concept behind this, which is a question about the value of doing comparative histories of immigration, and the values, particularly of looking at these groups that we're focusing on today as a way of reaching our students and achieving the goals that Beth articulated earlier. So I don't know if Robert, who began us with the overview, or someone else Lana wants to jump in, but can you would the panelists mind commenting just for a second on your views on the benefits and maybe even the drawbacks, the dangers, the pitfalls we need to avoid of approaching these questions of immigration comparatively?
I guess I'll jump in because I can see other people didn't unmute themselves. So I think that the difficulty obviously is, as been stated already, lack of material. But I think that in reality, there's a tremendous amount of material. We've just not gone and looked for it. And so I think mentioning the fact that the Lawrence History Center has so many oral histories, also for people that are interested in other parts of the Merrimack River Valley, the Center for Lowell History, which is part of UMass Lowell, also has a tremendous collection of oral histories that look at some of the same material. And also I've been working with a colleague on something called the Library of New England Immigration, and it's on the resources page for the site. And it has lots of my students' work as well as research that people have done on New England immigration history. And there's a tremendous amount of material there for teachers to use as well. And just one point about the value of it, working with high school students and middle school students and putting the Library of New England Immigration together, one of the things that came out often when we did workshops at like the Boys and Girls Club and Girls Inc. and whatnot, to have them use the site and see if it worked for them, they would always comment on when they were doing anything related to immigration history in their classroom. In Lowell anyway, people did the Irish, the French Canadians, the Greeks, maybe the Portuguese, and then it stopped. And they're all sitting in the classroom saying, well, wait, where's my story? Because in Lowell, which is similar to Lawrence and many other cities are changing demographically, the kids in the classroom are different and have a different set of immigrant experiences, refugee experiences, generational experiences, that if we're going to teach this stuff successfully, we have to include those stories. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Robert. Lana, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I would definitely say one of the real benefits of comparative history is that it allows you to look at change over time while also seeing the kind of structural things that are embedded into our society that haven't shifted as the years go by, right? So I think that when, specifically looking at the Irish and Latinx experiences in the Merrimack Valley, you can see some of the way in which scapegoating, backlash, stereotyping, this type of immigrant blaming, xenophobia, nativism was manifest more than a century apart, right? That those strategies, those tools, those sense of what was required to be an American, and the sense of exclusion and pushing back and attempting to blame anyone who was defined as being outside of that grouping, right? But the other benefit is that you can see what shifts over time and how we're in a very different moment than we were back in the 19th century. The similarities between the Irish and the Latinx experiences are very, very clear in these documents. And especially I think the documents do a great job at highlighting those similarities. But some of the things that are harder to see are the real differences between the eras, right? Irish came to the Merrimack Valley at a time of Lawrence, at least, industrial growth. The city was on a massive upswing in terms of its productivity, its economic power. Whereas Dominicans, Puerto Ricans arrived in Lawrence at a time of economic decline, a time of disinvestment, a time of joblessness. By 1990, the Latinx unemployment rate was at almost 25%, right? So there is a big difference of coming to a city to be exploited and coming to a city where you don't even get the opportunity to be exploited, right? Of course, it's not an opportunity, but we can see the real distinction, right? And of course, the other major distinction being that Irish were immigrants coming, more or less for this American dream, coming for opportunity. But Dominicans and Puerto Ricans were already part of the US's kind of imperial reach, right? Dominicans and Puerto Ricans were leaving their home countries, their home spaces, because of a political and economic circumstance that the US was largely responsible for, that the US, through military power, policing power, had imposed an economic situation on the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico that made the better life that people were searching for impossible to find where they were, right? So Dominicans and Puerto Ricans weren't moving to a new land. They were moving to the heart of the empire that had shaped their own home countries. And of course, Puerto Ricans were moving as US citizens already. So those distinctions are really key. And that that comes to the major risk of doing comparative history is that those comparisons can be used in a really oversimplified manner. For example, we're going to see in some of the documents the older era of immigrants, of white immigrants in Lawrence, white ethnics in Lawrence, saying, well, my ancestor, my grandparents or my parents came here and they were, they were looked down on and they were worked to death, but they made it and nobody helped them. And so Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, they should be able to make it too, right? This sense of we struggled and we overcome, so why can't they struggle and why can't they overcome, right? And those really oversimplistic comparisons are actually themselves quite nativist and quite alienating, and also a form of scapegoating, of blaming Dominicans and Puerto Ricans for the situation they find themselves in, right? So that's not an argument against real critical comparative history, but it's one of the risks of those oversimple comparisons.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. I'll get to you in a second. I just want to tease out what you're saying. Part of what you're saying there, Lana, that really speaks to me is that one of the reasons we teach history is so our students can ask questions about context. And so putting these two groups side by side begs the question, and I want to get back to the policy questions, which you and Robert and Brian all brought up about what policies are in place that structure this, whether it's mortgage policies or house lot size and things like that. But giving our students these opportunities and asking them to tease out these differences is such a great way to help them develop their thinking skills as well as their recognition of patterns in the past. We'll come back to it though. Brian, what about you? As someone who helped design this, as you obviously think it's important.
I mean, I think that what you just said about the historical thinking skills is key, and comparing and contrasting. And those are the skills that we want to develop in our students. And I did not take this from a academic lens. It was more the educational pedagogy end of like, how can I get my students thinking? How can I get my students to relate? How can I get my students to understand? And there's so many similarities, but like you said, there's so many differences as well. And getting the students to come to that, I think, is the process of them learning history and them understanding history. And I think that from the curriculum end, a lot of us teach immigration from a Irish lens. Let's start bringing in some of those other sources and those other voices, and so that our students who are sitting in front of us can see their connection to today and see and kind of break down some of the biases that they may have, some of the preconceived notions that they may have about communities that are very close to them. And I think that was an important piece in developing this for me.
Yeah, as I'm thinking about this, part of what you just said just really resonates with me. The idea that having our students learning to do history. One of the things, there's some people in the chat I've had methods class with or talked about with, is that, for me, it's thinking about what are the verbs people associate with their classes. Is it memorize? Is it record? Is it take notes? Or is it critique? Is it analyze? Is it, evaluate? And so this kind of primary source-based approach is really valuable for this. I'm also seeing opportunities. Something Robert said was, wait, where's my story in this? And this reminds us of the kind of, as we're talking about content and pedagogy, the real value and the imperative for us to have our students see their past in these histories. And so I'm wondering if Glenise might have something to chime in here about as we're talking about comparative histories and ways to kind of bring our students into it. Glenise, do you have any thoughts about this as someone who's been involved in the historical societies there, but also in contemporary communities?
Sure. I wanted to sort of piggyback on what Lana talked about in terms of like the oversimplified comparisons. Like we have had conversations remember, I'm going back to like a couple of years ago when we had conversations about looking at the pattern of immigration of Irish immigrants and Dominican immigrants specifically. And one of the things that we were exploring is sort of like, what is the moving target for people to sort of fit into this like whiteness concept, right? Like, so if we look, for example, into a question like, how long did someone how long did it take for Irish immigrants to gain political power in Lawrence versus how long did it take Dominican immigrants to be in formal political power? We've been around, Latinos have been around Lawrence since the 60s, and it wasn't until the, I would say, early 1990s when we had the first member of the school committee. So when we look at, sort of those questions, we start then getting into, sort of like what was touched upon, like sort of like how these oversimplified comparisons can also be very dangerous. In terms of like specific things like that your students can look at, like how long did it take to, to gain political power for this group? And sort of what is sort of like that moving target of this group can assimilate to the culture, to this melting pot, and the racialized sort of like stories that Dominicans, we look a lot darker, we're brown, we're a mix of many, of many different races. How does that compare to sort of like the Irish immigration? So just very practical sort of like research questions that will really get into how complex these comparisons are.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that struck me as you were talking is I was thinking about Brian's presentation. He went through very detailed about, and this person, this is the path to political power, start showing up in the 1840s, but it's not until the 1870s, 1880s, when people start appearing as the Ward 3 representative and the alderman and things like that. I think that kind of very specific type of comparison, a focused comparison, would be really beneficial for us as historians, but also for our students to that's the kind of research question we can ask and give them through city directories or through election records. They can do a lot of this work on their own and put it on them. One of the things that struck me from listening to all the presentations and is the importance of policy. Immigration, we often tell it through photographs, through which Robert had so many great photographs, and through all these stories. It's a personal story, it's individual choice, or we think about it as a group dynamics. This is when Puerto Ricans arrive in Manly and US. This is when the Dominicans show up. This is when the Irish or the Italians or the Lithuanians. But we often don't think about it in terms of policy, or if we do, it's the Immigration Act of the 1920s. I'm wondering if the panelists might want to make a plug for kind of the key policy in their mind for understanding this. As we're historians trying to put our minds around these enormous movements of people, policy it strikes me as being incredibly significant. Would anybody want to? I mean, it's such a loaded question. What's the policy? But if you have an audience here of almost 60 teachers, is there one thing you really wish teachers were talking about that
I would
obvious
say,
or not obvious? Go ahead, Robert. I'm sorry.
Yep. No, I would say that for me, when I think about teaching the stuff, which I do, teach immigration history often to undergrad and grad classes, is the Chinese Exclusion Act. Mm-hmm. Because that's, for me anyway, that's really where around Chinese exclusion, we start to have these debates about who's okay and who isn't. We start defining legislatively the other, and everything thereafter, it seems to me anyway, the way I think about it, grows out of that. Literacy tests and all sorts of other things. So I think that that's really important. I also think, just really, really quickly, that the other thing that is important to talk about is how policy over time makes it more difficult for people to come in. And so when we talk about, and when as teachers, or we hear our students talking about, well, that person's legal, that person's not, what have you, I mean, those sorts of ideas and concepts come much later into the 20th century. We don't have visas, we don't have passports, we don't have those things for a really long time. I did a podcast the other day on French-Canadian migration into New England with somebody from Manchester, New Hampshire. And we were just talking about people could just sort of walk back and forth. And, it took a long time before people actually had an accurate count or whatever. And so I think it's real when we use those terms, they're really loaded. legal, illegal, right? And I think that we have to really dig in and try to figure that stuff out. And so for me, again, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which really sort of creates an other, is really fundamental here to trying to figure out how to teach this history.
Thank you, Robert. Lana, do you mind?
Yeah, I'd love to, but this is, it's really unfair to ask historians these questions of like, what's their most explanatory moment? Because it's like asking us to pick our favorite child.
But I'm also only giving you a minute to answer.
and I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pick Supreme Court cases.
Is the answer just read my freaking book? Is that what it is?
No, I'm going to pick the insular cases by the Supreme Court in the around 1900 through 1903 is I think the full scope of them, that essentially ruled that the U.S. could become a colonial power, that the U.S. had the right to hold territories that were not fully incorporated, where the people there did not have the right to participate in the governance of the United States, because that really is the moment in which the U.S. justifies its role as a global power and justifies its right to intervene unilaterally, militarily around the world, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think that when we teach immigration history, we have to teach why people are coming. We have to get beyond that myth of like, well, wouldn't everyone want to live here, right? And get to the actual real reasons why people are being compelled to leave. And often, I mean, not just in Latin American groups, but if you look at Vietnamese, if you look at Cambodian refugees, the history of U.S. power abroad, U.S. intervention abroad, U.S. violence abroad is really a key aspect of immigration history that really needs to be foregrounded in how we teach and understand these stories.
I think that's such an important point. And I would just add that whenever I teach that period, I also love to show maps of global migration, not just the United States. Because our students often come to this thinking that, well, of course, everybody wants to come to the US. Well, a lot of people are coming to the United States, but they're also going to Brazil or to Australia or to, moving around Europe, and they're going back and forth, I think, as Robert talked about, is that this notion that, that's so deeply embedded in our students' psyche and often in our curriculum of American exceptionalism, talking about the United States as an imperial power and the United States as one of 40 destinations is a great way to complicate this. Brian, did you have any thoughts on this part?
I'm going to pass to the experts on this. I really kind of echo what the two of you said as far as the importance of the different acts and policies. I can't recommend America for the Americans enough. I think it's Erica Lee who wrote that book, and I read that over the summer with a teacher book club, and it was really, and you saw a lot of those policies, and it kind of helped shed some light on exclusionary practices that have been around since the founding of this country. And I think it's important to understand that we weren't always this welcoming place, and we're still really not a super welcoming place for immigrant people.
Thank you for that. I look at the time and I realized I was praising you for designing such a great seminar, but also need to keep on schedule. So let me end maybe with this question for the panel. And maybe Glenise, we'll start with you since I think is directed at one of your questions, is that a lot of these policies we're talking about are racialized, right? Either they're racialized through explicit intent or their impact. And again, I think Alana's talk and Robert's talk made us think about that a lot. Glenise, you've talked to us about the importance of creating brave spaces and having conversations about race. It's often fraught in any point in American society, but certainly at this moment and in classrooms where what we say is being zoomed into rooms where we don't know who the audience is. It's just the reality of this. We had some questions from teachers, Glenise, about the specific things that we can do to create these brave spaces through kind of teacher moves or these classroom contracts that you talked about. Could you give us some guidance here? Because we have a room full of people who want to do this, but may need some help doing it well.
Sure. And I'll just say very quickly on the last question, and I'm not an expert in comparison to Robert and Lana, but in thinking about the U.S. relation in Latin America, and just from a personal perspective and like understanding my own immigrant story, that would be probably a topic to explore. And what are the push and pull factors that brought immigrants here for very specific reasons that had to do with US policy without taking the agency of the individual immigrant stories. So I'll say that in relation to that question, but in relation to the question about race space, I sort of like introduced that concept because we hear a lot about safe spaces. And I don't think it's about replacing one for the other, but really looking for striking a balance between the two. Like we need safe spaces for people to tell their stories and feel validated. But we also need to create brave spaces in the classroom to be able to ask those questions in a way where you can own your impact and you can own your privilege, which I think it's something that it's not true in safe spaces where you're encouraged to share, and it's more about support. But in brave spaces, you work to recognize your privilege and to investigate your own identity and your own sort of path. So that's I think that's a little nugget for like we don't want to replace one for the other, but we want to have spaces where you can do both, where you can validate, but you can also, if you think of like support and challenge, like you want to be able to find that that right sweet spot of providing support, but also providing challenge. And just inspired by the amazing performance by Amanda Gorham the other day, like as a teacher, investigate what is the kind of ancestor I want to be. Like what is that? And like really mastering the courage to create that space in your classroom. So it's both ways. Like it's about how you create the space, but also what is your commitment to your own building of awareness and the courage that you want to use in your classroom.
I think it's so valuable. One of the things that sticks with me as a teacher and as someone who trains teachers is the courage it takes to hold people accountable. To say, hold on, let's call time out for a second. And what do you mean by that? Let's unpack that for a second. Or, that's not a term. Let's talk about what that term could mean to people, or to empower our students just to say, whoa, time out. Can we talk about that for a second? And so sometimes it's as teachers, our impulse is to, well, that wasn't that bad, or we need to move on, or the bell's about to ring. But what you're talking about, the safe space where students can feel, can be in your room where they're not being attacked, where they're being validated, where they're being supported, where they see, as Robert said, see their story and the history, but also where they can be brave enough and can practice holding other people accountable and talking through things and explaining, that's not okay. I think that's an important thing we can do, as not just teaching people history, but preparing them for public life. Is that fair, do you think?
I think so. And I think one of the things I suggest is like building community agreements, but I think just the fact that you can actually use them is really the powerful one. So you have to model that for students. So if you want to call people call out bias and prejudice, you have to, it starts with you. So we're violating something that we agree as a community. And also, like, what's the ultimate goal when I think about like restorative justice is really about healing. So it's not just about calling out and making you feel bad, but really about bringing people in and towards a path of healing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the advantage, as you pointed out, of the community agreements is, hey, look, we agreed to this, and let's revisit it and see, why we need to talk about this now. I look at the clock and I realize that I've already gone over by a couple minutes. I just wanted to thank this panel for taking the time this morning, but also for those amazing presentations. I really, again, I wear a lot of different hats. I learned a lot from them. We got all these questions from teachers. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights with us today. Beth, we're a couple minutes late. Are we doing okay here?
Right. And I also just want to mention that there has been, there have been folks chiming in on the chat. Really want to thank all of you for putting your comments there. And we are going to be grabbing those resources and we'll stick them on the website. Lots of great comments there. So thank you for that participation. Um,
Can I just say one other thing, just as a plug for stuff coming up? We talk about our students think about, we talk about how they think about immigration when they think about immigration. Is we all hear this is a nation of immigrants, and so when we talk about immigration, of course, we have to talk about voluntary and involuntary immigration, people who were taken here against their will, and people who chose to for a variety of reasons in a lot of contexts. But we also need to talk about people who are already here. The Native American populations. And so Beth mentioned the upcoming workshop on African Americans in Essex County. We're also gonna do one on Native Americans in Essex County, I think in May-ish or so. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We're trying to tell a lot of stories, and that one certainly is hidden in a lot of our curricula. So just wanted to plug that for a second. And so now I think we're transitioning to, if this began with students, we thought it'd be important to center the student experience moving forward, right, Brian? Is that what we're doing?
That's what we're doing. It's
All
actually kind of a nice segue into this video that I got a bunch of students to get on a Zoom on a Sunday night and kind of look at some of this. And
welcome everybody. I hope you're enjoying.
Everybody hear that? Look good? All right.
Professional development so far. We're going to take some of the things that you saw in some of the videos and kind of put them into practice tonight. As we go through and kind of analyze a lot of the primary sources, I'm going to use tonight a few techniques and thinking routines. A lot of times these are used for analyzing art or objects, but I still like to use them for professional development to get students to kind of think beyond the source, think what's in the source, and then kind of validate and prove why they think that, and kind of really think about, that's why I think that, kind of putting the sources in the context of the time period. So some of those thinking routines are see, think, wonder. What makes you say that? Obviously, the historical thinking skills can be used with all of these sources, comparing and contrasting, historical analysis and interpretation, continuity, change over time. A lot of different historical thinking skills can be used utilizing these sources that you're getting today. First thing I want to look at are these two sources here. And I want to think about guiding principle number 2, and specifically the part where students see themselves in these sources. And I'll give a little historical context for our students, and then we'll jump into kind of breaking down and analyzing them. The picture on the left is from the Boston Pilot, which is an Irish newspaper in the 19th century. March 31st, 1866, and it's depicting a St. Patrick's Day celebration in Lawrence. And as you'll see when we start looking at this, there's some kind of beauty pageant or a bunch of young ladies wearing green and ribbons that are green. The picture on the right is Semana Hispana, which is a festival in Lawrence during Hispanic Week. And again, you see a beauty pageant here in celebrating Hispanic culture. So I'm gonna kick it over to you guys and kind of see, think, wonder. So what do you see? And you guys can just free form.
Well, comparing the two, I think it's very interesting how you see the shifting culture in Lawrence, where you got the very Irish, central city 100 years ago, and now you've become a completely Hispanic city. So that's what you see over the transition between the two sources.
Okay. And you're getting that through understanding the context of the time period and the historical trends. Kind of pulling back a little, just kind of what do you see in the words? What do you see in the pictures that kind of are similar or different?
I think you can point to how fashion and different clothing is a big part of cultural representation in both cultures. Just right off the bat, you can see that clothing is like a big deal for these holidays.
What makes you say that? What specifically do you see that shows you that?
You can see in the image that there's, it looks like quinceanera type dresses. And then in the left, there's green to represent St. Patrick's Day, green sacks, green dresses. So.
Kind of just adding on to Shruti, I think in that little article, you can see how in depth they go to describe the clothing and describe what they're wearing. So I guess that just kind of adds to like how important it is to their culture.
Okay. Just for the sake of time, we'll kind of move beyond this and kind of look at guiding principle number 2 and seeing yourself in the source. And I'll give you an example from me. Like growing up, went with my father a bunch of times to the annual St. Patrick's Day breakfast that they had, or banquet. I forget if it was a lunch or a breakfast, but they always had a roast, and it was kind of funny. And everyone would be wearing green, and all of the different politicians would come, and it was a big thing for me. So I can relate to this source. How about you guys? You guys see anything that kind of hits you and kind of things that you can understand about who you are?
I would say in a similar way, just being raised in a household that was very Irish, St. Patrick's Day is always a big holiday for us. And so, there was a significance of it. My dad always had this funny hat he would wear from his youth that was St. Patrick's Day. So, clothing and the idea of the holiday being centered around these traditions is important and something I relate to.
Yeah, just kind of adding on to that. So there's actually this like Indian festival that happens around August, and it's like the ceremony that like a bunch of like women do. And I know like in my neighborhood, like my mom would like call all like the women in the neighborhood, all our friends, and they would like come and celebrate. I think Anika and Shruti can relate to this. And we all dress up, we all sing songs, and we all just spend time together. And that's something I see in these sources, because like when you look at the picture, you see all these women together, all these people coming together and celebrating. And in the paragraph, you can see it talks about like a bunch of people together. So I think the sense of community is really strong, and I see that in myself and in these sources.
Adding on to that, just how there's distinct things to each of these different cultures and traditions you see here in both the little paragraph there and in the image, just like how Sapra just said, in at least Indian celebrations like Diwali, there's distinct things that we do that make each sort of cultural celebration different. And I think that's really interesting to see.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Let's move on to the next one. Flying through this. So these two sources, to give some historical context, the image on the source on the right is from 1854. It's a Boston Herald article about an incident, or as the title says, the late riot in Lawrence. And then the other source is from the Boston Herald in 1984. New riots erupt in Lawrence. So obviously we're looking at two different sources that deal with a uprising, riot, whatever you want to call it, in Lawrence. Amy, you want to summarize quickly the what happened in 1854?
Yes. So essentially the native Protestant majority in Lawrence, there was this man named Goodrich. He raised an American flag upside down while also desecrating a cross in order to draw the ire of the Catholic population in the city, because there was a very nativist sentiment at the time, anti-Catholic, xenophobic, and it incited this riot which caused thousands of people on both sides to pour out. There was violence, and eventually it was put down, but only after there was, the authorities were called, the mayor came in, there were horses pulled in order to make the crowd simmer down and stop the ceaseless violence on both sides.
So the underlying tension is Catholics versus Protestants. Okay. The 1984 one?
Yeah, so for the 1984 one, it kind of started with a smaller family feud between a Hispanic family and a white family, and it kind of erupted into a larger violent riot in the streets, and it kind of highlighted the tensions between these two groups, and it involved the police, and also there was a hit and run, and there were some other graver injuries. But overall, there was a larger controversy that the police came in too late. So that was a major thing in the 1984 article.
Okay. So let's kind of make some connections in the comparing and contrast piece. So obviously there are definitely some similarities. What are they? What do you think?
The first thing that I see is just like in each of them, you see one small instance, and it turns into like a bigger riot. And they're between two like separate, I guess, groups of people. So it's just one small instance in both of them, and then they end up turning into bigger riots, and police have to come in to sort of simmer them down.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing that Anika said, but add on that like these small incidents are like, it's interesting because they're very small, like snapshots of like rising tensions between groups that are like occurring across the US.
Yeah, a very small incident, like they mentioned somebody kicking at a dog and then smashing a windshield in 1984, and they mentioned raising a flag, and this is after supposedly an Irish girl was kidnapped and brainwashed into becoming a Protestant. So these very kind of strange simmering tensions lead to larger things. And Lene, I think you alluded to something throughout the country. What do you mean by that?
Just in general during this time period, how immigrants were seen as like taking people's jobs and we're just not welcome here.
So there's a lot to that, like, and that's kind of the whole point of this this professional development, you know, looking at the fear and kind of discrimination towards the Irish. And that fear and discrimination happened in the 80s too, around in our area. And that's a big piece. We can break this down a ton, but let's see how does this relate, or what connections do you see to anything happening today?
Well, certainly what Shruti pointed out with the criticism of the police being called in too late. You see that very same criticism in last week's or the week before's Capitol riot, where the police were called in too late, or at least that's the criticism as of right now.
I think you can kind of point to the them versus us mentality that right now it's like polarization between political leanings, but in the past it was kind of polarization between identity groups and the immigrant population, whether it was the Irish Catholics versus the Protestants or the incoming Hispanic population in Lawrence.
Well, and in a sense, political leaning now has become an identity group also.
Any other thoughts? I think it's very interesting to see kind of divisions, and I think it's kind of interesting in the 1854 source that you have the mayor coming in and kind of hoping that or kind of cooling the tensions between the two groups. And I think that they tried to do that in 1984, but the police couldn't get close. Nobody could really get close. If you read more of the articles, they start bringing in members of the Catholic Church to come in and talk to people and kind of quiet the tension. So when we're looking at these situations, what's kind of an essential piece in kind of stopping these tensions from erupting?
That you need to bring in people with cooler heads in order for calm to prevail. And the idea that if the prevailing sentiment is anger and violence, and that's being espoused by a leader, then that's going to trickle down. But if you have the leader pushing for calm, it's going to help maintain the calm around, Lawrence in both instances.
Okay.
Kind of adding on to what Eamon said, like in the 1984 article, it said that like these tensions between these two families were actually like building a lot over time, and like that one incident just kind of like blew everything up. So I think just also kind of, I guess, dealing with tensions as they arise instead of just letting it like just suppressing and like letting it build up to this like one giant eruption. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop here just for the sake of time. We have a lot more to get to in the professional development, but I want to give the students a chance just to kind of give like a 10-second what this process has been like for them doing this, seeing some of this to fruition. So Praja, you're green right now on my screen, so you can go first.
Yeah, I think this process is really important because it kind of gets us thinking, and not just kind of looking at sources and like just looking at history, but also connecting it back to our lives and how it's relevant today. I think that's really important, and I'm really glad that we're doing it for sure.
You can popcorn it out to somebody else if you like.
Yeah, popcorn to Anika.
Like Sapraja said, I think it's just a good way to connect what we're constantly learning, like the history we're learning in class to present day situations. And I think that's important towards creating any change. You first have to understand what happened in the past and just like how what happened in the past was like dealt with. And then based on that, you can kind of figure out better ways, I guess, to create change.
Lynette, you can go next.
I think for me, I really enjoyed reading the two articles and then comparing it to last week and seeing how similar all of the situations were, and that really the only differences were like the location and then also which groups were fighting, but that it's like the same story every time.
Okay.
For me, I think I would say that the studying the unrest generally this past year, there was a sentiment of this isn't America. And I think in doing these learning lessons with you, Mr. Sheehy, it's made light of the fact that this is America. And there's a lot more that we aren't taught that it really shows that our history is very fraught and very delicate.
Well said.
I think for me, it kind of put into light how important the phrase history repeats itself is and how valid it is. And also to understand people's differences in America, you have to look at how it has divided us in the past to see how we can turn that into a strength and kind of reverse that and make it more of a unity factor.
That was awesome, guys. I truly appreciate you guys coming on. I truly appreciate all the people who were at this PD. Looking forward to the next piece of it.
All right. We get messages that you guys couldn't see half of that. All of those sources are in the master list that is on the website. I can share this PowerPoint with anybody who wants it as well. The whole point of this is to get you guys as many sources as we can. So we got it for you.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, that's it. It is so valuable to hear from students, and we can come up with all kinds of questions that we think are going to guide students, and but hearing what they relate to and what they see too is sometimes we can't predict, and you have some pretty amazing students, Brian. So it just, they're going to show us the way. We can leave it up to our students to help us through this. So thank you for that. And we're going to move on to the next part of our session together, which is the breakout rooms. So now we're going to get to hear from each other a little bit and try to examine some of these issues together. The way that we've kind of designed this is that we are going to be assigning you a room, and that room number, you need to remember it and hold on to that room number, because that room number is also going to designate to you which slide on a Google slideshow you are going to go to. We're going to give you, in a minute, we'll give you the link to a Google slideshow. And you are going to remember your number and go to the slide, the number of the slide that is your breakout room number. And on that slide, you will find a link to a grouping of sources that it has been kind of designed as a certain category, and you guys can talk about the sources, but also talk more generally about some of the content that we've been hearing about. And actually, I think it might be helpful for me to just show you what you're going to find when you go to the slideshow. So I will quickly just share that with you. Hopefully this works. So this is what you're going to find. Like if you're in group 4, you're going to scroll through. Oh, here I am. Here's my slide. You'll click on this slide with your group, and you'll see right here where it says, please click. Oh, and if you could just write your names at the top, that would be great. So that when we do a debrief, and we want to call on some folks, we know who is where. And then if you click on this link that you'll find, that will bring you to another Google Doc with lists of sources. And actually that Google Doc will have, here, I'll show you. So look like this. So I'm group 4, and with my other group members, here's what I'm going to see. I have my guiding questions, which are really just meant, if you feel like talking about this, great. If there's other things you want to talk about, that's also fine. But we have this discussion, suggested idea. Then here, my group of sources, if I'm in group 4, is going to be talking about connections back home. And I have this list of sources. Ooh, we've got a lot in this group. Some groups are not going to have this many. And if you don't get to many of the sources, that's fine. Just, do what you want with your group, but they're here for you. And we have, again, some suggested ideas, like if you want to start to think about how you might use these sources with students, great. If you even want to get to the point where you're thinking about analysis questions, that's wonderful. You can type in some notes here in this Google Doc if you'd like. And then if you want to, you can transfer any idea, like one great idea that you have, back to your slide if you would like. And that way we can sort of use those slides to debrief. If you want to start thinking about challenges also, that's another idea. Do you have any questions about what we're about to do?
Before everyone goes to the breakouts, if you're looking for the PowerPoint that was on the video, I put it in the chat, so you guys can take a look at that.
Brad just wrote, so many great sources. Yeah, and this is all Brian. Brian put all this together, so it's a lot. How long will we be working together? Well, what time is it now? 10:10. Let's say a good 20, we're hoping like maybe 25 minutes, 25 minutes. That sounds good. Because it's going to take some time to, introduce yourselves and absorb stuff. So other questions? Thank you for asking how much time. Anything else? Brad, if you're still with us, if you wanted to just maybe say something about media literacy.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things we were talking about as we were planning this is that we've talked about kind of the content benefits of teaching with these topics, with these sources. We talked some about the kind of historical thinking skills of, looking for context and asking questions and seeing what's similar and what's important and what's different, and looking at individual stories and big policy stories. There's all these kind of historical thinking skills. But as social studies teachers, we're also called to do a lot of other things. And one of those is to, according to the frameworks, and Ruby can tell us more about this, but we're called to, one of the guiding principles is to increase our students' media literacy skills. And so looking at newspapers and talking about newspapers' biases, looking at certainly the partisan biases of the 1850s newspapers that Brian has found for us, but also more recent sources. Who controls the power of the press? Whose names are on the bylines? Which communities are they part of? What does their language, what does it reveal about how they're thinking about different groups? That's a really important side conversation, or not even a side conversation, a conversation to have with our students, and just another reason for using these sources in our classes. Thanks, Beth.
All right, I think I just put in the link to the slideshow. Can somebody just share? I don't know. I just want to make sure that's correct. I hope I grabbed the right link. Okay.
I just opened it, Beth.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So please do grab that. I'll put it in one more time here. Yeah. Please take a minute to just grab that link. And I believe everyone also will have capability to share screen. So if you want to like look together at something, you should be able to do that. And now we're gonna go into breakout rooms. If you're having trouble with connectivity, sometimes that happens, and jumping into the breakout room, we will keep the main room also open so that that can kind of be its own group if need be. So I think Sherry is going to go ahead and assign you a room. We'll see you back here in about 25 minutes.
All right, it seems like people are back, and we can have a separate breakout session to make fun of Jerry's sweater if we want to. But I don't think we have to. What we thought we could do just for a second is we realized that we didn't really debrief after the student video with Brian. And I was just so struck by how comfortable his students were having these conversations. I was asking questions, and I thought it might be useful for all of us to hear a little bit about how Brian developed a relationship with these students and was able to have these conversations. So Brian, can you give us 30 seconds on who these students are and how you worked with them?
So I had all those students two years ago as sophomores in AP Euro. Over the past couple of years, they've been all involved with race amity, history club, different things. I've kind of developed a relationship with all of them outside of the classroom, but that kind of work takes time to really develop. Like one girl, when I had her, she's Indian, and she wouldn't talk about her culture, and it took a whole year of just kind of like making it safe to talk about, that she felt comfortable doing so. And now she's really opened up about it, and it was something she was not proud of, but now she's proud of. So developing that kind of relationship is hard work, and something that I think just asking questions and engaging with those like with your students is helpful.
Yeah, and I think thank you for that, Brian. I think, and you said most of these were seniors as well?
They're all seniors, yep.
Yeah. So I think this just shows, we're talking earlier with Glenise about the safe space and the brave space, and our importance, I think with Ruben earlier, about making this a commitment throughout all the social studies curriculum. To this, we can't just be an extra, like we used to do in the 80s or 90s, the extra special episode, Saved by the Bell, where they deal with caffeine pills or whatever it is. It's got to be a classroom commitment. And the fruits you may not see immediately. You may not see the first time. You may not see the second time. I can imagine Brian trying to ask these questions with sophomores where it doesn't go nearly as well as it did today. But if you stick with it, you create your students feel safe, they feel brave, and we can have these meaningful conversations. So thanks for sharing that with us, Brian. What we thought we could do in this point is to kind of circle back to the conversation we had with the panelists and thinking about content, about pedagogy, about kind of teaching moves, about the importance of making comparisons, but making them within a certain context. But really just to turn it over to y'all, Brian provided us with so many sources. We'd love to hear from this collected group is, hey, this is what I saw. This is what we talked about. This is really cool. And just kind of share with us, whoever wants to. We obviously don't have time for everyone to. Just some of the nuggets you found or the conversations you had as a way to move forward. So who's got something you want to share? Go ahead, Lori. Thank you.
I was in group number 8, and we discussed different strategies of how to, break down the 3 documents. We saw one of a census records.
What was your topic, Lori? Can you remind us or tell us?
Oh my goodness. Somebody in my group help. It was around, there was like, hang on, I'm having a brain fart.
Was it issues with police, group 8?
Group 8, yes. Yeah, group 8.
Issues with police.
Yeah, with the police. So there were census records from Lawrence, and then there was an article from the local paper, what was being done currently at that time in '84. And then there was raw video footage from a race riot in Lawrence. And we all commented how it was pretty mind-boggling because we've never really seen raw footage like that, I guess. So there's no comment, just, you saw the community, like how they were, just how they were trying to put things, clean up and whatnot. And so we talked about different strategies that we would use. The See, Think, Wonder. Something new that I had never heard of before done was, and the young lady that was also in my group was the gentleman, and I'm forgetting your names, I apologize, use this protocol video, play the video first, then read the description, and then use surprising, interesting, and troubling strategy to analyze the video, which I thought was really a good way of doing it. And then I know we talked about in terms of potential challenges. I have 2 co-taught ELL classes, sophomores that I teach at Salem High. And so we definitely would have, my co-teacher and I would definitely have to create scaffolding for our Ls. And then also someone else mentioned that we would probably also have to check for bias attitudes about policing among the students and ourselves for that matter.
Thank you for that, Lori. I wonder, did you talk about, because policing is one of those, I think it's really important for us as teachers to give our students a space to talk about this, what they're experiencing as students, as people, and what they're witnessing in the wider environment. Did you talk some about the advantages or disadvantages of talking about historical policing patterns as a way of creating the space? Or if not that group, we can ask the entire group, is that this seems to be an opportunity, but also maybe
we didn't
challenging.
like, our group didn't particularly talk about it, but I know just personally, I think for me personally, you have to build those relationships of trust from the very beginning in your classroom, and that's something I'm told I'm very good at and with my kids. And so kids are not going to feel comfortable talking about their feelings and their biases and whatnot if you don't create those warm, welcoming relationships. And so I think that needs to start at the beginning of the school year, and then you work from there.
Yeah, and that gets back to what Brian was saying earlier and what Glenise was telling us about the classroom agreements and having protocol.
Absolutely.
Can I switch to Jimmy's point in the chat that Group 7 looked at similar sources? And I don't know, Beth, if you could call up on the website or show us what it looked like. Jimmy, do you mind sharing with us kind of what you're writing about or what y'all talked about?
Sure, it was very similar. I had Ruben and Amy in my group, and we looked at some sources very similar about policing patterns, some biased references in newspapers. And, Ruben brought up a good point when we were talking about police reaction to certain ethnic groups and how these groups were underrepresented in the power structure, like in the police department or city council at that time, and we mentioned how it's really similar story throughout the generations for each new ethnic group coming in, whether it was 100 years ago or today.
And that gets to something I think Lana mentioned earlier about looking at, how long it took certain groups to achieve kind of political power. And then, it's one thing to say political power, but it's another thing to say, well, getting representation of the police force, and then talking about what that means. Was there one source in particular, Jimmy, that y'all thought, hey man, I can use that in class? Or
we had different feelings about different sources. One was a newspaper source that had some very stereotypical references to Irish people. Another source was a city council meeting showing, the lack of representation by the Latinx community. So they were different, by a modern source and older source. They both had a tie-in, and I think it relates to today with the criticism of policing today. So yeah, I think they're all helpful.
Great.
Yeah, and I think Governor Baker actually just did sign a new piece of legislation about thinking about police measures now, and so kind of bringing in something even as modern as something that just got passed might be interesting. Just wanted to mention that the resources are listed on the website, and they are listed if you see, like, so here we have primary resources. They're sort of in the master list, but they're also listed by groups. So you can kind of just click around and see some of the different groupings here.
Yeah,
So
I'm looking at the chat and I'm noticing Ruben and Bentley D.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, please do.
Me, sorry, Bentley, it's Derval.
Okay.
We just pointed out, I actually come from Ireland, so when I look at these, I do look through a different lens, that a lot of the sources are become very Americanized, where the students don't really understand the context behind them. They look at St. Patrick's Day Parade and they don't realize that St. Patrick was an Englishman. Like they see it all as very Irish. I think it's very important to teach the history so they get the context as well.
Yeah.
Like this whole idea of the Irish came for the American dream, they didn't. The majority of the Irish came over because famine, lack of industry, workhouses, eviction, disease, death, scalpings. Nobody chooses 6 weeks in steerage on a coffin ship and the idea of never going home again by choice. I think that's very important, that the dichotomy of like everybody came here because they wanted to versus, I guess, pull versus push.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where the like we talked earlier about context and the broader context of home countries and what was happening here. I remember in Robert's talk about the Italian immigration was because of the need for stonemasons, which was something I was very specific, that these are things that are really helpful to us. Ruben, you posted about the importance of media literacy here and how it relates to the frameworks. Would you mind, this is something we talked about for a second earlier, do you mind sharing about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I was in group 7 as well, and we looked at a source that described the sort of incident with an Irishman who was arrested by police. And there is, the stereotypical language to refer to that Irish spirit that made him act up, or even going so far as to call him Pat. And we were wondering, is that really his name, or is that just, a name you call Irish person? And how students might not notice that, right? Like they might just sort of read this as factual, or sort of walk away from it with some sort of reinforcing these ethnic stereotypes against Irish people as being drunk or disorderly. And there's really an opportunity that you could use to examine, okay, what is the bias of this author? What words are they using? Sort of how do you know? And what's the effect of that? And certainly that has resonance with thinking about the way the instances of police brutality are described today. And sort of building that media literacy lens for students to use when they look at media that they're encountering around current events as well.
Yeah, so I was talking to my students about this, again, at the beginning of a semester, introducing these are things that we're thinking about, and just, is it a riot? Is it an insurrection? Is it a mob? Is it a protest? Is it a, just the word we choose to use to describe 2 Wednesdays ago really matters. And so the other thing, I see Bianca and other people are pointing out things here, but that strikes me about if media literacy is so important, because otherwise they may say, well, that's just how they thought back then. That we all hear this, that's the way people thought, that's the way they thought, without saying, no, that's the way the people who had power of this printing press thought, or that this one author thought. Let's think about what another person might have thought, maybe the guy who'd been arrested, what he would have thought. It's just such a great opportunity to ask historical questions about perspective and power. So Bianca, you're talking about power and representation as well. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Oh, so we did, we looked at 3 different articles for group 11. One of it was like a census. The other one was, well, 2 of them were kind of like census and surveys. And then the last one was like a news article. But really thinking about how surveys are used, or these numbers are used to determine what policies are made, and who are represented in the policies. And we started to, it showed how like the Irish were like, the first article, or the first document we saw showed how like the Irish community in Lawrence was definitely like singled out, and how like they didn't really own their homes versus like other groups. And then the other one was about how there was this policymaker in Lawrence who was questioning a census where there were only around 2,500 Hispanic people that were in the community, but he was saying that there was more. So like really questioning these numbers and how that plays into representation and things like that.
Thanks so much. Again, if we can train our students to question sources and ask, well, what is the biases, or what does it reveal, what does it not reveal? I think that's one of the most important things we can do. We also need to stay on schedule because we have full Saturdays. I want to get to one more point though that Bruce is bringing out here about looking at implicit bias in school records, because I've found that students love thinking about schools and what schools are trying to do, what the hidden messages or the hidden curriculum is. So Bruce, can you tell us a little bit about what your group was seeing there?
Well, let me scoot over and look at this. So growing up Hispanic, 1984, we're wondering what the context of that is. Who is writing this? You know, there are, I mean, it's you know, count them quick. The students are constantly in motion. And then assuming that a great many of the Hispanics were just not finishing graduation and they weren't declaring in writing that they were quitting school for good. So a lot of trouble with the documentation. But they go on about the transiency and how many students are coming and going and trying to keep track of it. And then so much for continuity in the classroom. Just kind of the opinions put in there. And then jumping back to 1848, you know, about the Irish, you know, irregularity of attendance and tardiness have been of common occurrence, especially among the Irish children. And it talks too about lack of parental support and makes some generalizations that just seem to be kind of editorializing.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. You know, as Brian and Beth created primary source groupings for 12, 14 different topics. We obviously don't have time to talk about all of them. We need to get on with our days, but just wanted to draw attention to some of these. And as we move forward and think about what we can do as individual teachers, or if you want to do your PD stuff, these are sources. I know I will go and just download a lot of them for my own teaching. Certainly around certain topics that are really things I want to focus on. So I appreciate you bringing the school stuff to our attention. Beth, do you want to talk a little bit about what's next and about the sources and the website and how long things will live online?
Right. Let me just jump in for 2 seconds and just explain some of the sources. There's so much more out there. These groupings I don't think are everything. Beth and I worked putting them together, and you know, when I first started doing it, Beth's like, that one might be better here, and there's so much more. So I would definitely encourage you guys to explore the large source list. If you guys have any questions about context of what the sources are, I'm happy to kind of help with that. Spent a lot of time putting all this together, and I hope some of this is useful for all of you guys.
I think it's a valid point though too to understand that, yeah, the context is key with any of these sources. The last thing we want to do is reinforce like something that not a good idea to reinforce. So we tried to put in some annotations with the sources, but it might not be enough. Please reach out and ask us. So what will live on? So we have this Google site now that's really been designed just for this one workshop. And we intend to keep that going. Some of the presenters express that they might not want to keep their presentations available forever. So, you know, we'll keep them up for a little bit, and then we'll probably end up taking them down within a week or so, I'm going to say. But the sources will be there. We do have other resources for you thinking about ways to analyze primary sources, for example. And if you were interested in PDPs and or stipends, I can talk about that a little bit. Anything else though, before we get to that, because I'm sure not everyone is going to be interested in that. We have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone have a question that doesn't have to do with sort of next steps for PDPs and so forth? I'll just say that the registration for the next workshop, we hope that you'll come back, is open now. And so I will send out to everyone who registered for this workshop, I'll send you the link. So if you'd like to join us next time, we're excited to be thinking about African-American history in our area. Any other questions before we talk about PDPs and or stipends, or anything else, Brian, Sherry, anybody?
After everyone leaves, if I'll stick around if people have direct questions for like for me or want to chat about anything. I'll stick around after Beth explains all of the fun PDPs and that.
Okay, so basically for PDPs, you can earn 10 PDPs for this experience. You know, it's the workshop plus hopefully you did your pre-work. And basically what you would need to do, and I'll just share this, I guess, is go to the website. And there is a section on PDPs and stipends. Anyone can earn the 10 PDPs by simply filling out, there's the link right here to, it's like a Google form that asks you some questions about today. Part of it is thinking about maybe what sources might you incorporate, what techniques, what materials, based on our time together and this workshop, to build into, you know, sort of a curriculum to apply for the stipend. And we have a limited amount of money for this. And so I'm going to say that it's going to be between $75 probably and $100 to earn a stipend. What we're thinking is that, and we'd love for you to do the PDP, excuse me, by March 1st, if possible, to send that in to us through this form. Okay. For the stipend, what we're going to do is we're going to take the PDP reflection / activity plans, which basically that's what it is, and use that almost as your application for if you're interested in the stipend. You'll see on the form, it'll say, are you interested in applying for a stipend? And if you click yes, then we're going to consider this PDP submission as your submission for the stipend. And it is going to be sort of an application process because we have a limited amount of money. So what we'll do is we'll let you know, hey, we loved your ideas. Yes, we're willing to pay you a stipend. And what you would need to do is just try out something about this stuff. I mean, we understand that this might not be the content that you're teaching right now, but if there's any way that you can bring in some of these techniques or just do something that shows that you know, demonstrates what you've learned through this program, we'll have you submit a reflection about that, and then you can earn the stipend. And we'd also, I would say, like, if you are going to do the stipend, we'd love for you to come back and maybe share a little bit about that experience of working with students. And we're going to make that opportunity available probably like right towards the end of the year. And I don't know if we can require that, but we would love for you to do that. Are there some things in the chat here? I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see the chat properly. Does anybody have questions about that?
The chat's a lot of people saying, good job, Beth. Good job, Brian.
Good job. Oh, hey, listen, this is our pleasure. It was a lot of work, especially for Brian, a lot of work, but it was really so wonderful to be with everyone today. You know, obviously we love being with teachers, and hey, we want to help those students, you know, become like that wonderful poet laureate we saw. We know that they're out there in Lawrence and North Andover and all the places where you guys teach. So thank you so much for all you're doing this year.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying.
Welcome. Anything else? Brian, Sherry, Brad, anyone?
No, just this is great. Hope to see everybody again in a couple weeks and a couple of months when we do the same sort of thing with African American history in Essex County.
Love it. And thanks again for all the great resources in the chat. We will definitely be grabbing those. All right. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. For your next Zoom call.
Yeah.